Welcome to the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors. We bring together competent professionals to break down concepts designed to empower listeners with the knowledge to make some of life's biggest decisions. Our end goal is your financial peace in alignment with what's most important to you. Now, let's start learning together.
Hey, welcome back to the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors. I'm your host here, Kris Flammang. And today we are continuing with part two of our two-part series on if Jerry Maguire was a wealth advisor. It's just me and the microphone, the camera today, no co-host. The episode is going to be a little bit longer than our usual episodes that run about 6 to 12 minutes. But there's going to be a good reason for that because I'm covering part two, as I just mentioned. I'm going through a chapter that I contributed to a book that I wrote after the financial crisis back in 2007 and 2008. And in part one, I had put forth that I would talk you through a Jerry Maguire type magnus opus of the collective habits that our country had that led up to the financial crisis, maybe some of the ones that have stuck around, some ways of thinking that might need to change. And I put forth a different definition of wealth, one that I think might lead to better success and happiness. And today we're going to go into part two, which I'm going to talk about what I call the 15 for 50, which is 15 things that I think if they were applied, or most of them were applied, or a good handful, would really put you in a better place, would get you closer to your goal of financial independence and your definition of wealth. But first, let's do the disclaimer. The information that we provide is our opinion and not necessarily that of our firm or the platform. We provide general information only on the podcast and not any customized investment advice. Nothing should be construed as financial, tax, or legal guidance. You should consult with your own professionals about your personal situation. So today's part two, we're going to talk about where I think we should go from here and how we could move more closer to some permanent change. I'm going to share some key concepts for financial independence that I have found common among families that I have worked with. And some of these might be new to you, but remember, the implementation of the good ideas is always far greater. It's much better than the creation of those ideas. So we're going to find out today if me, Kris Flammang, posing as Jerry Maguire, is able to show you the money. Can I complete you? And will I have you at hello at the end? So let's find out. Let's jump into these 15 for 50. Before I start that, if you didn't see part one, it's important that you go back and watch that because it sets the stage and kind of the base for what I'm talking about today. That's presenting a definition of wealth and giving you mindset. Today is the actual nuts and bolts on things that I think would be helpful to implement going forward. I'm calling those the 15 for the next 50 years. Okay, so let's jump in. Number one is have the right money mindset. So many times I do meet with clients whose strategy for investing has been skewed and influenced maybe by the business media. The market outlook they're concerned with is maybe at best around 12 months. Now, in general, making decisions based on the next few months is incongruent with how long you may be retired. So that involves often creating a 3 or 4 decade strategy. And your money has to last longer than the shelf life of a popular finance magazine or a self-help book, because your life expectancy is, I'm sure, much longer than that. So all of us have different thresholds for pain, and this is also true with investing. We often make investment decisions based on emotion and then try to rationalize those decisions later with sound thinking. But in essence, when emotions are stronger than an educated and sound financial plan, we can do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Unfortunately, that formula prevents us from making rational decisions. Another contributing factor is something that I call the herd mentality. All of us are scared to do something dumb. And if the newspaper and your brother-in-law and the financial magazines and the business media, the financial experts on TV and your best friend at work and the neighbors and the little old lady in the checkout stand all say that you're crazy for not doing something, you could start to believe it. Well, to help combat this tendency to tinker at the most inopportune times, it has been suggested that maybe we should think about our money as two colors, red and green. Understanding these differences can help you avoid making decisions about your finances based purely on emotion. So let me explain. Red money, as you can imagine, has the potential to be hot. It's volatile, it chases returns, and it takes on risk. This is money we invest. Think of that as being longer term. Do you know anyone who has lost money investing? Of course, we all have. Now, green money accepts no market risk. It craves stability and is willing to accept a lower return for little or no fluctuation. This is the money that we save. Think like the bank, emergency fund type stuff. Do you know anyone who has lost money in a savings account? Probably not. Now, as you consider these colors and their purpose, you can see where a strategy that uses this mindset strives to provide a greater level of comfort in bad economic times. For example, if you knew ahead of time that 2/3 of your retirement portfolio was in greenish money and you were drawing your income only from that green bucket, then you would be less likely to make rash decisions on the red money that could prove detrimental to the longevity of your retirement and of the money. The point is to be prepared to be in the right spots before the worst thing happens. And Warren Buffett has even said markets are designed to transfer wealth from the active to the patient. So making drastic changes in reaction to the apocalypse of the day is rarely optimal. And there's several softwares out there. We use one that will show someone, given a certain investment portfolio or how they're positioned, maybe what their max decline could be or their max loss given past economic events. We call those kind of a stress test. So that's something that we do with clients that helps them understand, oh, if I'm invested like this is how bad it could get. Am I okay with those trade-offs? Okay. So number 2 in our 15 for 50, personal responsibility is key. With the decline in traditional company pensions, reduced 401k plans with matches, and the growing national debt, it is evident that your goals will not be met unless you do most of the work. Social Security will continue to make up a smaller part of retiring workers' income. It's convenient to point the finger at someone else, but borrowers blamed bankers, who blamed investment bankers, who blamed Freddie and Fannie Mac, who blamed rating agencies, who then blamed the bankers again and point fingers here and there. And then everyone needed bailing out. So no system makes anyone honest, and you can't legislate morality. So my thought is, why not own the problem and the solution? Now, in a way that does seem unfair, but dismissing something as untrue because it's unfair isn't very smart. In the end, only we will be largely responsible, me and you, for our own outcome. The financial well-being of our future generations is relying on us to get this particular point right. Now, number 3 in our 15 for 50 is realistic optimism. America is innovative and adaptive. We move forward. I'm not suggesting that everything is just peachy keen, but pessimism accomplishes nothing except stalling progress. So have you seen the latest electric cars? I just took a Waymo out in Arizona where there was no driver. Civilians can take rides in space now if they've got the money to pay for it. Many of our advances today were unimaginable 25 years ago. There's a Chinese proverb that quips, people who say it can't be done should not interrupt and get out of the way of the people that are doing it. So my suggestion is to believe in the doing, be a doer, and have realistic optimism. Number 4 in our 15 for 50, something I call appreciative living. So when was the last time that we marveled at how fortunate we are? Weddings and funerals always get me thinking about how blessed I am. It's said that Ben Franklin would make decisions by writing the pros and cons down so he could evaluate the merits of both sides. The fact is that our real problems are far outweighed by the good things that we have in life, which in most cases are free of charge. Remember that 1 month to live example that I gave in part 1. Number 5 in our 15 for 50 is a generosity or abundance mindset. Okay, so according to the Census Bureau study ending in September 2024, the estimated median income for a 4-person household in the US is about $77,000. The population estimate of the country sits around 300 million. So how much of money could go to worthy causes if only a small percentage, I think what I figured out was 5% of our population just donated 5% of that median income? Hopefully my math's right here. It's a big number, somewhere in the billions. And can you imagine what kind of money this would what kind of things this money could accomplish? Now, I'm not trying to guilt anyone into giving money or your time, because that's not the right thing to do, and it doesn't really work. So in this context, we'll define generosity as a contribution of your money, your time, or your intellect that involves foregoing something we want for something someone else really, really, really needs. So John is a textiles plant manager and is paid $120,000 per year. His son has autism. This year, he dropped his home phone line, went down to a basic cable, took his lunch to work, bought a used car when his old one died, and gave 5% of his income to the Autism Society of America. Jonas owns the textiles plant along with 10 other plants in the Northeast. His net worth is 50 million and he makes 5 million per year. He gives 50,000 a year to various charities at high-end fundraisers that he attends with his spouse. So who's more generous? Well, $50,000 is a sizable sum, but when we look closer, Jonas is donating only 1% of his income and requires no real change to his lifestyle or his thinking. John decided to choose between what he wanted, the premium cable channels, lunches out, and a new car, and what he passionately felt others needed more than his own luxury. Here's my point. In other words, life-changing generosity involves some level of sacrifice. This is important because without the sacrificial part, it's unlikely that you'll experience the real benefits of being generous. If you want a real-world example, go to a third-world country. People with nothing but the shirts on their backs and a loaf of bread willingly give their food to someone who's gone hungry longer than they have without a second thought. They are essentially giving away everything they have. Now, when we're generous to something that we believe in without expecting anything in return, it is a likely result that we will have a higher level of happiness and fulfillment. Generosity is contagious, and the encouragement to others is a fantastic side benefit. By settling as an example, we can have a legacy and model generosity to future generations, which fosters a deep sense of satisfaction. Now, from my own experience and observations, I've concluded that sacrificial generosity is one of the strongest deterrents to greed, selfishness, and the influences of media advertising. We are more mindful of where our dollars are being spent. And in his book, Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren encourages us to learn to admire others without having to acquire or wanting to acquire what they have and we don't. I'm confident that making generosity a part of your lifestyle will result in a good thing for you and also for the recipient. The truth is, we are most happy when our focus is on other people. All right, number 6 and 15 for the next 50, get a war chest. Now, you hear a lot about emergency funds. Regrettably, the intended method for creating one and its use got distorted and has been distorted and is distorted in our culture. They're intended to be used only in the case of an emergency, and they take the form of savings and checking accounts, CDs, money markets, things that don't really carry any downside risk and that are easily accessible. Now, over time, this attitude changed, and an emergency fund became anything that you could borrow or could take from anywhere that you could get a hold of it. So home equity lines of credit, 401ks, retirement accounts, credit cards all became accessible backups. These are not good emergency funds. This is devastating on many levels. Monthly expenses are increased and savings earmarked for retirement basically gone. So expert opinions do vary on how much you should keep in an emergency fund and where it should be kept. But in times of great complexity, I like to keep things simple. So to provide an ample cushion in case of a normal unexpected expense and to help resist the temptation of making an emotional decision to tinker with your long-term investments, get a war chest. This is at least 1 year's worth of your core living expenses kept in a highly accessible place and has no chance of declining. Use regular savings, tax refunds, and financial windfalls to build this. Now remember, it's only used in case of an emergency. A true emergency threatens your family's survival. The reality is that with a backup fund, you're going to be in better shape over the long run than those who don't have one. So make it a priority to have a war chest in place by the time you retire. Number 7 in our 15 for 50, set a core lifestyle in advance. Think back to a time when you first started out in the real world. You landed your first job. You were single or maybe newly married. Maybe your first child was on the way. You didn't have a lot of financial responsibility yet. Now, fast forward to today, you can't even begin to count the responsibilities on your shoulders. You got to send your kids to college. You got retirement to worry about. You got to escape the demands of your time and your money. Do you ever long for those simpler days? I do. Well, we can get caught trying to keep up with the Joneses, but I've got a newsflash. The Joneses have moved, defaulted, foreclosed, short sailed, and filed bankruptcy in pursuit of setting the standard longed for by everyone else. So let's not do that. Let's assume that you're able for just a second to reach your highest earning potential in the 5 or 10 years maybe before your retirement age. And it's common to increase your lifestyle as your income goes up. We all have that creep. Bigger houses are bought, newer cars are in the driveway, vacations become lengthier and more posh. We think we deserve all these perks, and why not? Your neighbors and your friends seem to be living well, and they can afford it for now. You may have heard it suggested that you will need 70 to 80% of your income in retirement, and that assumes that you've reached a position of needing only 70 to 80% of your income right before you retire. Now, we know your lifestyle will not magically reduce the day after you stop working unless there are several expenses you can eliminate in a short period of time right after that. How likely is that? Probably not really likely. In my experience with clients, I've found expenses rarely go down after retirement. We settle into a standard of living and want desperately to keep that up. In some cases, life may get more expensive. But there is a way to increase your chances of staying retired and needing a smaller percentage of your current income rather than all of it when you retire. It requires settling into a core retirement lifestyle in advance. Okay. So maybe starting 5 years before your target retirement date, we would commit to having all of your debts paid off, all debts paid off by the time you retire. And you would start practicing prior to retirement, that 5 years or so, but you'd start practicing for retirement as if you're living on much less than what you are making. You're living below your current income level. As an example, you're making 200,000, but your core lifestyle is maybe 160 or 180. So in essence, if you started practicing this in advance of your actual retirement date, there would be a more certain possibility that expenses really are less than what your income is right now when you get to retirement. Planning this way would also give you a little bit of room for error if your retirement savings isn't quite what you wanted due to market fluctuations or maybe changes in your ability to save. Now, the important here is frugality is practiced in advance and sustained. That I find can be imperative to a retirement lifestyle that has a high certainty of lasting as long as you do. Doesn't mean you have a scarcity mindset. It just means you're practicing this in advance and putting that frugality effort into the plan. So don't take on any new debt payments that won't be paid off by the time your planned retirement date comes. And the key to this is moderation in every area of your life. So before we leave this point of core lifestyles, I want to bring up a particular subject that may be presented to you during your golden years. You may someday be approached by one of your children or grandchildren to help them out with their own bailout, some kind of a loan, or they're in a bad financial situation. In some cases, it may be no fault of their own, although I suspect if it's a financial one, that's probably a lesser possibility. And I don't want to make blanket statements that you should never lend a hand to your flesh and blood, but at least consider these 4 things before you do. 1, be prepared in your mind in advance that it may start out as a loan, but it ends up as a gift. Number 2, the circumstances and how they contributed to their dire straits. So what part did they play in the place that they are? Number 3, will the bailout or this helping them out financially put your ability to stay retired at great risk? That's something you want to consult with your advisor about. Number 4, never co-sign on a loan. Please don't co-sign on a loan. That is super bad. Okay. Now, if you do end up saying no to bailing out a grandchild or a child or a family member, and choosing to love, support them, and help them in non-financial ways, I have an easy way out for you. You can blame your financial advisor if you have one. If you don't, and you need a scapegoat, you can blame me or on the podcast. All right. Number 8 in our 15 for 50, focus on usable net worth. Has anyone ever bragged to you about what they're worth? On a popular reality show that I used to watch, potential clients proudly stated that their net worth for inclusion in an exclusive dating club. Well, aside from being tacky, it doesn't really say a lot about a person's readiness for retirement. And it can also create a false sense of security. You don't hear friends saying to you, I'm taking a withdrawal every month from my net worth to meet expenses. We need to be careful gauging our financial readiness for retirement based on this term. In the simplest definition, your net worth is the value of everything you own minus what you owe. Things like homes, cars, sports equipment, and land are all included in your net worth, but you really can't withdraw from those unless you sell them. They're not easily liquid. Now, I'd like to suggest using a different term or focusing on a usable net worth. Usable net worth means accounts from which you can easily and fairly quickly begin to take withdrawals. Think retirement vehicles like IRAs, 401ks, annuities, stocks, or bank accounts. Those all fit in the category. The goal is to have your usable net worth increasing consistently leading up to when you start taking income from these assets. Now, for property and other things you own, you can't really consider them usable until they're sold, or if you're using it as a rental and the check has cleared the bank. So the next time your annoying brother-in-law wants to compare net worth, ask how much of his is actually usable. All right, number 9 on our 15 for 50. You and the financial media have little to nothing in common. All right, listen to these quotes. Renting is throwing money down a hole and is never a good idea. Given the direction of this market, I would overweight in equities right now. There is no way Washington Mutual is going out of business. I would hold on to that stock. The market's too frothy. Go to cash or gold before you lose everything. These are all sample statements I heard on various financial programs telling people that a certain strategy or a product is never a good idea for someone is highly assumptive. I cringe at the thought that thousands of Americans might be making major financial decisions that will affect the rest of their lives based on what media personalities are saying. Now, I'm not suggesting that everything they discuss is a bunch of hooey, but many of the programs do a fine job of informing the public on various financial topics, but it's just that, it's just information. I'm asking, what does that have to do with you? Do yourself a favor, unless the talking head is intimate knowledge of your assets, income, liabilities, expenses, insurances, and your estate plan, take their statements as simply information or entertainment, not as advice. Certainly not advice to take action on without considering the effects of your overall financial plan. So never accept what you hear as face value. Make sure that your interests are served and it applies to your particular situation. All right, number 10 in our 15 for 50. Consider planning with an advisor on some level. Now, this could sound like a plug for what I do for a living as a bias, but I want you to hear me out. Yogi Berra once said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll wind up somewhere else. And sadly, many American strategies these days for making work optional is hope. Now, I agree, hope is a good thing. I have hope. But hope may be one of the best of human emotions. It's not a financial strategy. You can make an argument that an intelligent, savvy, well-informed person can achieve their financial objectives on their own. They could formulate goals, create a strategy, choose the proper investment vehicles, and regularly review their progress. If you watch commercials put on by the self-directed stock trading sites, it can seem as easy as opening an account, doing some research, looking at some charts, buying some stuff, and you're off to glory. But I think for someone to successfully construct their own financial life themselves requires a certain breed with certain characteristics. First, they must be able to tell the difference between information, advice, and wisdom. Anyone with a computer and internet can harvest plenty of information and advice, but wisdom is much harder to find. Furthermore, the computer can't tell whether or not you're asking the right questions. I found there's a point of critical mass with information. Too much of it can cause someone not to act at all and not do anything. We can get frozen with fear and be fearful of making a mistake. Secondly, I think the do-it-yourself person, although possible, they have to be able to refrain from making emotional financial decisions at the absolute worst times. In the wake of the Great Recession and subsequent market rebound, there's no question that this unprecedented combination of fear and greed could significantly impede one's rational decision making. In fact, behavioral financial research shows that no matter how vehemently you insist that you will be guided by reason, you'll likely repeat past emotionally driven decisions, even investment ones. And third, for the do-it-yourselfers, they would need the ability to objectively conclude the best times to act on their investments and the best times not to act. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing. Now, we only know this in retrospect. So who knew in March of 2009 that was the time not to act in decreasing one's stock exposure? Because if they had wrote it down to that point and then sold, that would have been the absolute worst time. No one predicted the substantial recovery, when it was going to start, and how long it would take that ensued from that low point. Think back to COVID, big drop, very fast recovery. Think of the recent tariffs, big drop, very fast, 2 months, great recovery. So as a financial advisor, I can tell you that we can help with a plan for rational course of action. Look at your situation objectively from the outside and keep a focus on the long-term success of your retirement. In times of market stress, advisors can return to the plan that you spelled out, talking about that red and green money. What are your short and long-term goals, the investments that we're choosing to help you reach those things, and the actions you will take in the event of a major change. So talking about what you're going to do when bad things happen ahead of time is extremely important. Their wisdom can act as a buffer and insurance policy against making really bad decisions at the wrong time. Okay? Now, people don't seek out advisors because they don't have the intellectual capacity to figure it out. Most people could probably do that if they gave it the time. It's just that many people don't have the time, expertise, or desire to do it themselves. Many people have a lot of other things that they would rather do than worry about their money. And they've really got to focus on those, what I call those 3 big risks in retirement: market risk, inflation risk, which is the rising costs, and also longevity risk, which is the money that I've set aside gonna be able to last me my entire lifetime. Identifying those blind spots and dealing with them, that's really where the advisor can provide a great deal of value. Okay? All right, number 11 in our 15 for the next 50. A house is a place to live, not a retirement account. I might get some flack on this one, but I'm gonna push forward anyway. So money can certainly be made in real estate. I agree. I have some, I own it, I have some rentals. I believe that buying real estate for the purpose of supplementing income can be a sound endeavor and part of a diversified retirement strategy. Where I get concerned is when normally rational people suddenly become flipping wizards intent on scoring the big payday because a lot of people they know are making a killing. At least that's what people said in the past. I'm not denying that a substantial amount of money can be made in pockets of time buying and selling properties as home prices are on their way up. But where do you think a lion's share of those profits go? Any guesses? Probably back into another property with plans to repeat the process over and over until we're having cocktails with all the real estate billionaires. And speaking of those real estate guru guys that used to sell those books and do all those workshops, they never really made any information public on the percentage of their students that actually became self-made real estate millionaires. But your guess is as good as mine. Unless they sold out at the peak of the bubble, chances are all or most of that killing was made got killed when the bottom fell out, or when the bottom falls out. Selling at the top is near impossible to predict when it comes to real estate. It's easier to know when prices are in decline. So if you plan to own other properties besides your primary residence, make sure you do a few things well. First, go into the purchase with the mindset it is a long-term investment. Second, plan on having all mortgages on your properties paid off by your retirement date. Third, if you want to sell, you want to do it around the time when everyone else is raving about how great it is and how it can never go down. So when the papers, the internet, the TV, and the late night promotional programs are touting the unsurpassed merits, that's your cue to probably consider acting. Number 12 on our 15 for 50. increase your retirement savings automatically and annually. So I commonly get asked how much money a family will need to accumulate for retirement. You've probably seen books and commercials that talk about getting your number. And I've read headlines suggesting that $1 million doesn't even come close anymore. You might need 2 million or more, or maybe it's 3 million. Well, the answer to this important question is it depends. For example, if your expenses, your core living expenses, because you don't have any debt, are $3,000 per month, and you receive $2,000 per month in Social Security and a small pension, 1 million would probably be sufficient, assuming you don't have any major health expenses or any financial events that cut into that. That 1,000 per month that you would need to take from the $1 million would be a very, very small percentage, like 1.5% of the 1 million. So I think it's reasonable to assume the chances of staying retired in this example are pretty good. Now, having an amount you would like to save by a retirement age gives you a goal, but whether you make that number or not is determined by several factors that are outside of your control. In addition to starting to save early, I found it helpful working with clients to focus on an ideal rate of savings. So depending on how early or late one starts putting money away, at least 10 to 15% of your pre-tax income should be saved each year to have any chance of replicating your lifestyle. That's if you started early. And this doesn't include any match that you might get from your employer. If you started late, you might be needing to sock away 20 to 30% or more to play catch up. Now, there are two painless ways to help ensure that your contributions are consistent and growing. First, whenever it's available, use automatic payments or like that automatic enroll to put deposits into your savings vehicle for retirement. You're more likely to keep up if you don't have to write the checks out. Who writes checks anymore? Second, you want to time the increase of your savings percentage around the same time you get a raise. So if you get a raise at the same time every year, that's when you're triggered to raise your savings amounts. You keep some to meet the rising cost of living, and you give the retirement account some to grow your nest egg. A lot of plans also now have what's called an auto escalate, which you can just set it up. You don't even have to go in and do it. Every year it'll just increase it by a certain percentage. Now, unfortunately, with any savings rate, there are no guarantees. If you put 20% of your salary away each year and you work for Enron or Lehman Brothers or Washington Mutual, the percentage you set aside didn't really matter, which leads us to our next principle. Number 13 and our 15 for the next 50. Diversification still works. Now, lately, I've heard a lot of talk that traditional forms of diversification are much less effective, even obsolete. We need to stress that diversification never ensures a protection against loss. That's an important point. But rather, spreading your assets across multiple classes or types could help reduce the volatility of your portfolio. So that premise still applies. Consider a very simple example. Portfolio A consists of 100% of indexes or index funds across broad stock categories in equal amounts, let's say 5 categories, 20% each. Large cap, international, small, real estate, and emerging markets. Portfolio B holds 50% of the above mentioned indexes, so 10% each one. And then we have 30% in an index that represents the US bond market. And then we have, let's say 10% in a money market and maybe 10% in alts or a fixed account of some kind. So during market corrections, from market high to market low, which portfolio do you assume went down less? If you said the second one, portfolio B, you'd be right. And if that's the case, how can diversification be obsolete? Allocating your money between asset classes that have historically responded differently to market conditions still makes sense. The appropriate combination for your situation should be made with consideration for several factors, including your age and your goals and your risk appetite. Other personal financial metrics will play into that too. And further levels of diversification are effective, but are outside the scope of the discussion here. I often get into conversations also not only about asset allocation, but also about tax location, which is where should investments be placed or where should you be investing to have a beneficial situation down the road as it relates to taxes. So we'll do a future episode on that. Now, I want to caution you against what I've seen as being the most devastating example of ignoring this diversification concept. Many people have bet their entire financial futures by concentrating all or most of their wealth in one stock. This commonly happens in a couple scenarios. One is a stock that's been inherited or gifted and it has a sentimental value and it's been accumulated by working for a publicly traded company. What is so difficult, I think, for these people in a lot of cases is that emotional attachment that they have is hard to break. People can associate that position maybe with a loved one or the person that they got it from. And employees who get the concentration by working for a particular company, they have a big pride in their employer and they can often confuse that pride with their work ethic and their productivity with how the stock should be doing. So if I'm doing a good job at work, then the stock should do well. Well, no one working at the various companies who crash burned and became worthless over the past 30 years ever thought that would happen to them. But you can never eliminate risk entirely. You can mitigate it. And holding all or most of your wealth in one particular stock has an especially dangerous risk. So the financial author Nick Murray has smartly said, you can get rich by not diversifying, but it's progressively harder to stay rich by under diversifying. I will mention that there are tax strategies that are available to help unwind the taxes and the capital gains and to help unconcentrate a particular position or a client from having too much in one stock outside the scope of our discussion today. But I might do another episode on that in the future. But sometimes people say, well, I don't want to do anything because of the big taxes. That can be addressed. Number 14 on our list of 15 for the next 50 years. Create a retirement distribution plan. Retirement income plan is another way to put it. So there was a study that was done in the mid-2000s called Spending the Nest Egg. It was done by the Vanguard Center for Retirement Research, found that less than 1 in 10 people have a formal distribution or income plan in place for retirement. They have a plan for accumulating but not distributing. Now, we're not just talking about a budget here. More people have plans on how to accumulate money for retirement, but a plan to distribute the money to receive it is commonly absent. So how you take the money out and the effects on the asset's longevity, the tax implications, and estate considerations is just as important as how it's invested. Now, there are varied opinions on which distribution strategies are best for retirement. There's lots of different ways to approach this. There's pros and cons to each. They can all work depending on several factors, but any distribution strategy needs to consider these things. First, the real possibility that the money needs to last 30 to 40 years. Secondly, the cost of living will continue to go up and you need to keep up with that rising cost. Third, your assets will experience some kind of risk, not just market risk, could be interest rate risk or longevity risk or inflation risk. Number four, taxes will never go away. They'll always be around. And the fifth consideration is you should give careful thought to the withdrawal percentage, the amount that you're taking from the portfolio, the percentage that's being taken out. It's important to set a portfolio withdrawal rate that doesn't put the longevity of the money at great risk. Now, the advice community, there was a big study that was done on that, has theorized that maybe 4% is kind of the sweet spot, but this will vary based on each person's situation. And one other point that's worth mentioning, at all costs, you want to avoid taking withdrawals, taking income from something that is going down. There are certain distribution strategies or certain income plans that deal directly with this particular risk, and those should be included in the discussion. Okay? All right, number 15 in our 15 for the next 50. Debt is a retiree's enemy. Now, debt does have its necessary uses, but some things in life just can't easily be bought for cash. I'll agree, but the expanding use of debt and easy access to it greatly contributes to our personal economic issues. Here's a simple question. If you don't have any debt going into retirement, no payments on anything other than your core expenses, Will your living expenses be more or less than if you had debt? Easy answer, yes. It's rhetorical, of course, but folks will rationalize themselves silly to buy something that they don't need with money they must borrow to impress people that they don't even like. So what kind of debt is ideally acceptable? Well, many people have the misconception that if something can be bought on credit, it's okay to buy it on credit. In my opinion, debt can only be used for the purchase of something that you believe has the ability to show a return. So I consider examples of acceptable debt to be home mortgages, educational expenses, or a business. All other types of loans I would put in the consumer debt category. Examples are credit cards, equity loans, car loans, balance transfers, retailer charge accounts, personal loans, not used for buying something with any upside potential. Now, some would argue a car loan shouldn't be included in consumer debt, but there's little chance that a car would appreciate in value unless it's a collectible. If you must do a car loan, consider a used car that has already experienced some depreciation in value when you get it. And if you must have a new car and you can stay under the mileage, you can consider a lease. For all consumer debt purchases, you should strive to pay cash. This will require some level of delayed gratification, but knowing that you paid for it outright will remain long after the short-term euphoria of getting it when you wanted it instead of when you could afford it. Okay, enough on that. So my goal as an advisor and during these 2 episodes was to help clients spend more time doing what they really want to do with the people that they really care about and help to enhance their enjoyment in life without having to worry about money. So I'm hoping that the 2 episodes challenged you to evaluate your current position, come up with that new definition of wealth for you that will motivate you and guide you, and also consider implementing some of these 15 for 50, the principles that I went over today. America's resilient. It begins with us. Let's get started. That concludes part 2 of If Jerry Maguire Was a Financial Advisor. The question now is, what are you going to do? Did I complete you? Did I convince you? Did I change your outlook? If I had you at hello or any other part of the podcast today, feel free to reach out. You can reach us, lpfadvisors.com, or you could email us at info@lpfadvisors.com. So I appreciate everyone tuning in today and listening or watching. If you found the episode helpful, please share it with someone you think who might like it. And if you feel so inclined, subscribe. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. But for today, be well and see you.
Thanks for listening to the Confident Retirement Podcast with LPF Advisors. For more information, please visit lpfadvisors.com. If your ears are pleased and your mind at ease, do share this program with your friends. To subscribe wherever podcasts are found.